Hello, hello. Wonderful to have a very special guest today who is in a great mentor and friend for me in the last years. We have Dr. Klaus Kleinfeld today, who is in a conversation with me, who is the only leader to have successfully served as CEO of two Fortune 500 giants on different continents, IKEA in the US and Siemens in Germany. And I mean, with his nearly 40 years of career spanning multiple industries from established business to tech startups, he has advised US presidents, global leaders in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. He is now the founder of K2 Elevation and invests in North America and European tech and biotech firms and actively engaged in the private sector, public affairs, and cultural boards. And he's splitting his life between the US and also being a European citizen. Enjoy work, life, and family in New York, where he's currently based. Thank you, Klaus, for taking the time.
Andy, thank you.
It's
Pleasure to be with you, as always.
it's always a beautiful and interesting conversation. And Klaus just released this wonderful book, which gives me basically weekly, daily guidance, which is all about basically mastering strategies for sustainable success in business and life. And I think there's the first topic where I would just love to just chat with you about that kind of aspect of like breaking the paradigm that you have two separate lives, and you're basically saying no, it's one life. So how long did it take you to understand that in your life?
Well, that part I think I learned relatively early, because unfortunately I grew up with death, and my father died when I was 10. I was busy sitting by his deathbed, and I also there was another relative, who I accompanied before I was 18, So it was clear to me that life ends, and sometimes it ends at a point in time when you never expected it to end, So I think that understanding was thrown to me as a curveball in life very, very early.
And it's thank you for sharing that. And so when in your own career, how did you basically manage that both aspects of life? Because you're probably other people would say it's work-life balance, but you say no, it's something different. It's about energy. It's about your own energy.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That part, the discovery of energy as being the driver, not time, came to me too very late in my career, but it fortunately came to me, So I was a big fan of efficiency. We both were born and raised in Germany, Discipline, efficiency is the thing, so that everybody grows up with. So I was an absolute advocate, obsessed with time management and with efficiency until one day I realized this is really not what matters most. What matters most is energy and energizing as a leader, because as a leader you have to make people do things at a certain point in time, and you have to lead them, and you will only be able to lead them if you are energized, and to be energized you have to have energy yourself, and this other thing of work-life balance, I always saw my work as a part of my life. And I felt that even when I didn't really have money, I felt that if these two things were not aligned, then I would have to make a decision. One principle that I live by, and many who've worked with me know this, is love it, change it, or leave it. Right. And I always looked at things. Do I love it? I want to love it because I want to put my whole thing in it. I want to be completely committed to it, and have impact on this planet and in that job, and if I don't have that, then the question is, can I change it so that it works this way. And I've had many situations like that where I could change it, but that sometimes we have to come to the conclusion is probably not worth the effort. You might be able to change it, but it's not worth the effort and the time that you put into it. Your life has an ending point, so you rather change.
Hmm. And so would you say that's primarily change the situation, or is it mainly changing the mindset?
Leave. I mean, so if I come to the conclusion that, and I'm talking particularly, mostly of a business environment, but also of a private environment. I mean, yeah, as I think it applies as a general mantra in life, for pretty much all the things that you are in. Does it give you energy, or can you change it in such a way that it gives you energy and energizes you? Can you, or is this an environment that drains you and will continue to drain you? And then the question comes: why stay? Why continue that dreadful situation?
I have your book in front of me, and so the and you interestingly, differently than all other like books, you're starting with, you basically have two main factors, right? Mastering, it's called mastering the inner game and mastering the outer game. But you start with the inner game, even though most lives are designed in particular around um, what you want to achieve in terms of money, in terms of business. But basically, but basically, you're saying it starts from inside. So what kind of, why did you structure it like that and not like most other people?
Yeah, well, I've been around for a while, and I have noticed. I mean, I've seen what I call comets, shooting up like rockets, and on trajectories to conquer the world, and then boom, crash down hard. And sometimes this is very painful to watch, not even being in it, but also painful to watch, because if you know the person, you say this was avoidable, and what a loss, and the signs were there before. And what I concluded is also in all of my mentorship, not with startup folks, like how we got to know each other, as well as with the senior CEOs, or people who are on the next step to becoming a CEO. People usually get derailed through the inner game, not through the outer game. Not through the outer game. The outer game is just a way how it shows. How it shows. People burn out if they can't manage their own energy level and the way they conduct their life. Then at a certain point in time, it dissipates them. And it might actually be, and that's the point that you made just now, is that people say, oh, you want to be rich, you want to be whatever, billionaire, multimillionaire, or whatever, so but then if you I mean I know a lot of folks who have achieved a lot, but then when you see how sad they were at the end of their life, and looking back and realizing that they missed out on important things, it is actually very, very sad. I mean, in my book, there is a chapter, and I assume we talk a bit about purpose also, but there is a chapter on a study about what do people say on their deathbed, and that might sound a little dark, but I think it's probably a very good reminder of what is the right reflection to do, as long as we are not on the last breath in our life. What do they say? What are the things that they say? And there's nobody who says, I wish I had spent more time in the office. Not one single individual. What do they say is, I wish I had allowed myself to be happier. And that has a very profound um, discovery. And the discovery is that happiness comes from the inside. It is who can control the happiness, and we're happy to talk about that if that's of interest. So, and the other thing is things like, I wish and it's not exactly verbatim, but I wish I had allowed myself to be more me and not listen to the voices of others. right? And that comes to the point that very often, I mean, the self-talk that's going on in our head, unavoidable, has things in there that is not us, that some other people have managed to get into our heads, and they, like on a replay, they constantly come out with certain clues. But when you reflect on it, you say, that's not me. And I don't want to be that. I just don't want to be that. But many people don't do this conscious reflection and let themselves guide by these voices, wrongly assuming that these voices are them. And in fact, you have a choice. You have a choice over this.
Hmm. I think this is a bit is also, I mean, you have seen my personal journey on in kind of how I went through my heartburn out basically. Um, eh, but I think in my own reflection, it was more of what did expectations that for sure were there, but also that I put on myself, right? Because there is a certain part. It's not that somebody, I mean, you can have a resilience and say somebody says something that is, I mean, feedback, as we just discussed last week, is always valuable and there's a certain way to treat it. On the other side is what of that is really the substance and what is really me. On the other side is if you want to create, if you or your ego wants to create a certain in you a certain persona that is kind of the best CEO, the best husband, the best the beloved by everybody, right? And these are mostly things, at least in my own reflections, that came from my own but they weren't really from the outside. I took them from the outside inside, but it's it was a subconscious, probably sometimes a conscious, sometimes but mostly a subconscious choice. So, um, and I think that is the perception of what is right or wrong, especially as a CEO. And then with those stories you hear of the perfect humans and superheroes out there, and I think, but it's us still taking those, right? And I think this is it would be very interesting before we jump into the topic of purpose. What when you lead a company like Siemens, Alcoa, Neom, right? One of where the public pressure is just there is no single day where not somebody has a big opinion and somebody with a big following has a big opinion. How do you how do you create that inner resilience to not take that personal, to not take that on your own? What was your own, like, in all of those roles? How did you manage that?
Well, I mean, it's a question of training. One is you learn to cope with external criticism. You have to learn it, otherwise it burns a hole in you, and it will eventually make you incapable of acting properly. I have seen people doing it. I mean, there's an interesting advice that I once got from former Chancellor Kohl, who told me, Dr. Kleinfeld, what I've told my PR team, when you give me the morning clippings, only give me the good articles. So I don't follow that. I don't follow that. But he gave me that as an advice. I don't follow it. Never followed this because I think it's good to also get a feel for what other points people have. But you have to also understand that in most cases you have thought a certain situations. So I'm not now talking about business leadership situations. In most cases you have more information and you have thought through the options in a much better way than anybody outside doesn't have the information, hasn't had the time to think about it. So you should have had that. You should have taken the time to evaluate options and come to a conclusion. The moment you've come to a conclusion, you have to communicate it. And very often you're in a situation that you can only communicate the decision, and they don't understand. And people will see there are other options, but they don't understand what other options have as a negative, right? And you very often cannot even talk about that because you don't want people to get ideas about what other Armageddons could happen. So in a way, you have to take it in and let it rain over you. I always think I put my raincoat on and it rains over me and doesn't affect me. That's just the way you have to deal as a leader. And the other thing is, I mean, this is not defining you. I mean, what's defining you is in the end that you can look yourself in the mirror and say, look, I mean, anybody who can judge based on these facts, I think would judge that this is a proper decision. The other thing that you said, Andy, one about you, and I have not heard you say that before, but it's interesting that you said I wanted to be loved by everyone, right? And also this reference to you hear these superheroes and they always give you the impression in some fields that love is everything, which is true. Love is the most important ever energy that we have as humans. However, if in business you believe that you have to be loved by everyone, I can tell you set yourself up for complete disaster. Because your role will, first of all, you will have to make decisions that at the time by some people will not be seen favorable, and as long as you know that you have made the best decision for the overall and you can stand by it. One of my very, very good friends said to me when I was a young leader already, he said, Klaus, if you want to be loved, buy a dog. That was his advice, and I think that is why a lot of leaders love dogs, to be honest, dogs or cats, so yeah. But in leadership, and the other thing is we had a 60th birthday of a longtime friend of mine about 2 years ago, and I also met somebody who I worked with and who I had actually asked to leave, and he was very mad at that time. We were all very young, and he has then charted a course for his life that is insanely positive, super good. I mean, from the private side, on the business side. And while we were there together, I mean, he took me apart and said, Klaus, I wanted to have a chat with you. And he said, Klaus, you know that I was very mad with you at the time when we had this conversation, and we were friends at the time. But I told him, this is not the right job for you. There's other jobs that suit you better, and it's better at this point that you pursue that avenue instead of grinding this and be unhappy in this. So, and he was very mad with me, and he said, Klaus, thank you very much. If you wouldn't have given me this feedback and the push, my course of life would have not led to this happiness and this achievements. So I think that's the ultimate kind of um, nice thing that you can see as a leader over time, when you see not only have you led certain situations, but you also have helped people to get the best out of them. And feedback is important.
Mm. And it is probably, I think, what is core essence for me, what you said is like the the aspect that, for example, I had personally in me, is like that I want to be loved, like it's in the moment, right? And that means you can't do any like future looking hard decisions, because they won't be hard in the moment, right? And so this is like, and I think this is also, as especially for young founders, because you have a tendency to work with friends, right? And then you bring in your friends and your crew, and then you build that in a very close uh, manner, and then the roles change, right? Because the requirements change. The business for that serves 1,000 customers isn't the business that serves 100,000 customers, and it's complete different roles, expectations, but you're there, right, with your friend. And and I think that is and I had also some experiences, as you know, with some of my co-founders at Konex, and they were, and then now we're like even best mates to each other, even though we hated each other for a certain time, because it's, I think, the that but that's, I think, the hard reality. If you, I think, from that aspect, if you work with friends as a founder, it is a beautiful experience, but you also need to acknowledge that there's business, and you, as a leader, are in service of the business first and foremost, and you and you're you're in service of that entity, like that, and that means you probably have to have especially with friends, those hard conversations. And if you're not ready for that, probably it's not the best idea then to bring them in, because it will set up both of you for failure, right? Or
I think, first of all, this is not, this is the dilemma pretty much of every leader. With friends, it's particularly difficult. But I have many times seen, if you work together with people and you become very friendly, and at the same time, there might be a situation where you have to sit down and talk about it. And I think the advice that I would give for that is always distinguish between respect for the person and feedback on the performance in a certain role, right? So I think, as long as you tell, this is I like you as an individual. I see a lot of things in you that are wonderful. I see capabilities there, and they are all there. At the same time, what I see now is your role requires XYZ, and I'm looking at the last 2 years, and XYZ has not worked out well with this. So I think we have a misfit of what you are bringing to that role and what this role requires. And I think it would be painful for everyone, also for the people who you lead, who see this, if you were to stay in this role. And I think it is my obligation as your leader to give you that feedback if you haven't seen it yourself, and I think it is my obligation also for these people you lead to put somebody else in there, put somebody else in it. And I'm actually very happy to help you and find something else for you where there's a better fit. I mean, maybe there's something in the company, or maybe there's something outside where I have some relations, but let's talk about that. My experience with this is that very often the person is disappointed on the one hand, but also in a way relieved. Relieved because they feel it, they are unhappy, they sense that they are not performing at their best, and they are really, really happy that it comes onto the table, and if you want to do it extra nice, which I would recommend, you don't have that conversation just when you say it's over, but also have the conversation in a regular feedback way, so that the individual has a chance to adjust.
no, this is, I think that's very, very, very good and practical advice. On the other hand, we talked about purpose, and we see this right now, and I see this a lot in. And actually went through my own journey. I was like, okay, when you like, especially when your purpose is not to survive, right? Because if you're survival, then your purpose is very clear. It's in our race. It's like I have to earn some money to get some food, and so. But once you're a little bit higher in the Maslow's pyramid of needs, then you're like, okay, what do I do with my life, right? And I think I see a lot of especially in Europe, where you have people that are coming from families that have a certain level of abundance, where and wealth, where they're like, okay, what do I do with my life, right? And then so you have a whole chapter on at the end of the inner game of managing energy and everything to find purpose, and which is probably also the longest chapter if I remember. But it's like what is your, like, what advice would you give to young entrepreneurs if they ever struggle in with the topic of purpose? What's your
Well,
advice?
the purpose, the reason why this chapter is so long is because the question about purpose is one of the oldest questions that mankind has asked themselves, because it comes down to, who am I? Why am I here? And that's what humans naturally ask at a certain point in life. So I wanted to, and it's a question that I've asked myself many, many times, again and again, right? And I felt that I had not done a good job for myself to see what different perspectives have come out over time. And therefore, what I've done is I provide in that chapter. I don't provide one answer. I provide views that different people have had over time, and I think I call it the right through space and time. So that it gives ideas of what should I follow. But there are a number of things. One is many people think there's only one purpose that you have to follow, and that is what you have to have constant all the time. That's not what it is, I think. As much as we have multiple roles, we carry multiple hats. We are a father, we are a husband, we are probably a son. We are a business leader, we are a founder, we are a mentor, and all of these things. There are different goals. So it's not necessarily one purpose that you follow. There are some people who say very single-mindedly, I have this one thing. It's rather rare than not. And I think if you say, what is the one thing that I'm looking for? I think you potentially set yourself up for failure. So be open to saying, okay, I have these different purposes, and I follow those. That's one thing. The second thing is people think it has to be constant all the time. That's not true. Your life changes, and so purposes change, and some of these things you might achieve, to be honest. I wish you do. And so that's why I wrote this. And my very simple indicator how good are you on purpose is the morning test, so to say. You have slept halfway decently, and the alarm clock rings and you need to get out of bed. And the question is, what happens then? Do you roll over and say, oh no, another dreadful day. I hate it. I hate it. I wish this day would go away as fast as possible. Or do you say, oh, that's interesting. The day has started. I can get going. I have this and this and this, and I want to get closer to these things, and I want to achieve certain things, and then you get out of bed. So that's a very, very good test. And is there a certain sense of purpose, or am I missing out on that?
So I think this is very interesting. As just when I went through the book, it's like you have that quote in there in one of the perspective. It says, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." And I think it's super powerful, right? Because I think there's as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as you have to go through like a lot, right? And there is that anchor, that deeper anchor that kind of every morning puts you down. It's like, okay, why I'm doing this? And I think that is on the one hand something that's like, do you think it can be like, how much can it be cultivated? Because it's also a mental thing versus how much does it come from intrinsic? Because I was like, I struggled personally a lot with that. I was like, how much is it something that comes from inside that I feel, or something also to find purpose in. For example, I give you a very simple example. I can find now purpose in cleaning the kitchen, which I didn't find because I said like I want to be like I want to be of value in and want to support in the family and household, and that might be one task. But if it's that or whatever it is, right? I think there is a this is more of a task level. I'm aware of that, but there is a certain part. How much of that can you create, and how much of that is just coming from deep inside?
Well, I mean, a lot that you can create comes from deep inside. So, and you have to connect it. That's the point. So, and again, what I would suggest in this, listen into yourself and see, does this feel that you get excited by it? Again, I mean, this morning test is very, very good. I mean, I would argue that, and I don't know, but I would argue that potentially, I mean, cleaning up the kitchen, might not get you easier out of bed, but I think it would give you certain energy, and you would say, look, a clean kitchen and a good surrounding is a great thing. But building up the AI company that you're currently building up would get you very quickly out of bed, even though you might see there are certain things that I see as curveballs getting thrown to me. By the way, the quote is from Viktor Frankl, who went to the concentration camp, survived the concentration, was the single-minded purpose that he had, and he wrote a whole great book about it. That he wanted to survive, and he wanted to pass it on to the next generation. So, and he's done this, and very, very powerful. I think we should talk a little bit about energy to make people understand, because purpose does to energy what a laser does to light. It basically takes all of the energy that you have and concentrates it around one point, and that's why the purpose is a magnet. That's that it's a magnet concentrator, a magnet that gets you there. But if there's no energy to be to be concentrated, still it's not going to be great. So the foundation is energy. If you lie in that sick and you have a purpose, it's going to make you better with purpose than without a purpose, but you still won't tear the wall down. So I think you have to understand first what is it that gives me energy, and it's really four sources. I mean, it's physical, it's emotional, it's mental, and it's spiritual. Physical, it's actually so simple to remember because the old folks had it down. It's body, mind, and soul. Boom. I just split mind into emotion and mental because it's two very different things, but it's body, mind, and soul. Get the body in shape. That's very well understood. Oh, not very well, but I think by our listeners probably very well. But some you wonder. But it's decently well understood. It's movement. It is what you eat, what you drink, how much you sleep. How light exposure is, how the air is. Those are the typical things there. But the second part already, the emotional side, is very little understood. Because people say, oh, we all are humans. We have all emotions. Yes, we have all emotions. But the question is the emotion something that you can control, or is the emotion something that somebody else controls in you? And people would say, well, I mean, I saw this person that made me really angry. Well, the truth is that you allow this person to show the emotion of anger because the emotion is in you. So it has to be you involved in this, and so something is there that this person did or triggered in you that you allowed the person to take control over your emotion. And that's an important conclusion to understand. I can control my own emotions. There's a ton of tricks. Breathing is one, and there's a ton of tricks how you can do that. But the fundamental thing is to understand that, really understand that. And the other thing is to understand also what gives me energy. What gives me energy? And we talked a little bit about love. Love is the most strongest emotion that humans have. And people always say, yeah, but I'm dependent on getting love from somebody else. Well, no, because there are certain tricks, like giving something, or showing gratitude. You know, I have this, obsession almost, like random acts of kindness. So one thing I love to do in New York, I mean, you have to use an elevator a lot. Whenever I go into an elevator, and in many cases I don't know anybody who's on the elevator. I start a conversation, say something, and it is most rewarding. I have to say, most rewarding, and gives my life joy. Or so things like that. If you give somebody a gift, or help somebody else without you feeling obligated for it. I mean, you will feel this love inside, and you will feel highly gratified. So those are number of tricks around, and there are more on the emotional. On the mental side, mental is the question of what do you focus on? And I always use this example of the old shoemaker who has two sons, and he wants to pass on his business, and he doesn't know which son to pass it on to. So he sends both of them to Africa, one to the East Coast, one to the West Coast. The first one sends him a note and says, Father, unfortunately, I have very bad news. There's no market here. Everybody runs around barefoot. The other son sends a note and says, Father, send me as many shoes as you can get your hand around. This market is endless. Everybody runs around barefoot. It's clear, and we see it every day. I mean, we see this in our environment every day. There are people come to you, you yourself even. You look at a certain development in the world or in your business, and you say, "Wow, that's a challenge. What do we do with this?" But if you force yourself to say, "Is that only a challenge, or is there also an opportunity here? What is it?" And I think great leaders have the capability, to have this perspectives. Great leaders also have the capability to to compartmentalize, to basically control their thoughts. So basically, when they go in the door at home and see their family, that moment they tell the thoughts, the business thoughts, you now disappear for the next 1 to 2 hours, and then I go into my home office and they can reappear. So this aspect of compartmentalization, I don't know any single leader, successful leader, who doesn't master that very, very well. Sometimes to a point where you say this is close to insanity. I mean, almost like the house is burning down and the person is still doesn't feel affected by it. So anyway, so that's the mental one, and on the last one, the spiritual one, it's this. I mean, spiritual. If I almost feel that this is a four-letter word in the business society, and we don't talk about that. But in the end, it's a super super powerful source of energy, and well, I mean, read it in my book, on my perspective on that, and I would at least recommend try it out in your own way.
Yeah, I think this is super important because in your book you put it together as like as a physical that's kind of energized, right? Emotionally, that means you're connected to yourself, and then mentally, that brings that focus, and then yeah, spiritual, it's alignment. And I think for at least my own journey had been a lot about that spiritual journey about what's also my it really like define your integrity. Are you really in service of a bigger thing of society, of the planet, or just your or just yourself? And so I think that, and then what do you believe in? Do you believe? And I think that's also has a certain part of nearly at least like for myself of letting go, like because if you believe and you start feeling that connection to something higher than you, that is like a supercharge, because also that gives you a perspective, right? And you can there's so many ways of spiritual connection and belief. Ultimately it puts everything into perspective. And I think even some people just recently they find it through nature, right? Just even through the rational thought of you're on the spinning planet that's 4.8 billion years old, and then and the sun has risen, like we're just this eye glimpse, right? And so how important is that small single problem in the bigger picture of humanity and the planet? And so I think or just looking at the stars, right? It doesn't like there's no like it different things can give you a spiritual connection. And I think this is but it's always gives you a higher perspective, and I think it, as you said, puts things into its place, right? Very
Yeah,
simple,
I
like
mean,
very
yeah, I've had, and during my life, I had many conversations about, I mean, do you believe in God? So, and I have said, I do, so, and then they say, how do you know? And I said, do know what? That there's a God. And I say, I don't. so but then the question, I mean, then people say, so how can you believe? And my point is, what, I don't, and maybe one day we will, and then I have to change. But what I can say is the very fact that I've made the decision, I can make it every day, makes me stronger and gives me another level of energy. And I was challenged personally very, very heavily already at a young age. And that's when I found this, that there is a source that is extremely powerful. You have a choice, and you don't have to commit for all of your life to it. You can change. And that's the thing that sometimes people feel so afraid of trying it, and then they try to associate it to a certain practice, and or a certain institutions, and that's your choice. You can some people are happier with this. You don't have to, and so I think I would allow myself. I just wouldn't. I mean, my hope is that it encourages people to not just throw it away and say this is not for me, and so because I would say try it out, try something out in this aspect. It's a huge energy source in times when there is nothing else left.
Mm. I think that's beautiful. And I think also that because you started that the whole conversation with the topic of death, right? Where also this is kind of such a big fear, but it can be also such a positive and beautiful driver of like, okay, how many days? No, no, like talking about opportunities. So, no, it's like
You're pretty close to it, I have to say. You know, so.
I was like, no, this is yeah, no, but I think it is your like this assuming like a healthy person in a certain age, like if you know how much days you have left in that human experience, yeah, then you're like saying is like, how do you want to actually spend? This gives you perspective. How do you want to spend your day, your life, right? What is it worth it to put your energy into concept? And I think that's kind of the for me such a such a beautiful reminder when you think about okay when I'm leaving this planet, when I'm leaving my body, when is what is kind of how do we want to have lived my life? And if you at least after my experience with 29, I started thinking about that more and more, right? And thinking about what is worth it, who do I want to spend my time with, right? The human connections, and then the topics. And I think this is kind of at least that perspective of death, even if it's a topic that is not very often spoken about, because people are associated with loss and fear. Also, when I lost people in my life, it is always at the bottom of it is love, right? Because why do you feel pain? It's the love that you feel for that other human being. And I think the it is actually a reminder that you have a certain time to on and then the question is what do you do with it, right? And how do you want to when you go, how do you want to have lived your life? And I think this is why it's a it's something it is where it's beautiful that you started a conversation with it because something that nobody usually talks about.
Well, there is a chapter, as you know, also in the book on in the purpose part about exactly that, because there was a gentleman who I know decently well, who was the head of KPMG, who we were together on the day that he received the diagnosis that he was terminally ill with a brain cancer, and didn't disclose that to me. He then died all of a sudden, withdrew from job all of a sudden. Then I read an article in the Financial Times that post-mortem, he published a book, which he wrote in his last years. So I buy the book, I read it, and it starts with this chapter, you know, and I realized that I still remember the conversation. We were three, four leaders, and he gets the call, he steps to the side, comes back, and we spend an evening together, you know, and he just received that. Then he describes what he did when he received that diagnosis, you know, and how he changed his life, and the conclusion that that he found how much time he spent with people that don't matter that much to him, and how little he has spent, you know, with the people who matter to him, you know. So, and the good news is, I mean, we read this now, as sad as it is, you know, but at the same time, hopefully we have a long life ahead of us, you know, and can avoid these mistakes.
And this is I think that is such a it's interesting, right? When how people react when they get the worst news. I in business in family life is like and how do like how, as you mentioned, how do you manage your emotion? Would you have thought you would have like in that moment when he got the call, knows he will pass away, and then
No, but
comes
that's what
back
I
to you.
meant with that's what I meant with compartmentalization, you know? He was so trained that he basically puts that to the side and says, "Well, I'd rather wanna kill myself now," you know, or what's going through my head, but he stays to the evening, you know? Now you can say, was that the right decision or not? But I think it was so probably he was probably under such shock, you know. But he resigns immediately. He resigned immediately the next day. I understand from the book, right? But yeah, fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Do you think it's also do you think people can accept in like this in real time? Like, because you said like there's you said in the three mantras, right? Love it, leave it,
Love it, change it, or leave it. Love it, change it, or leave it.
change it or leave it. So I mean, there is basically you can't change that reality. You can't really leave it because it's your new reality. So it's like how do yeah, I think that, but this is yeah, it probably just takes a big processing, but it brings you back to your relationships, and I think that what are the relationships that truly matter, and at least I have a practice every year. I drew a little circle in the middle, which is where I write me, and then I was like, who are the ones that are the closest, right, in my own circle, in my own universe, and then I put together and like just look back and how much time did I spend which individuals and what individuals and who does actually matter, like how close do I want to have them in my own universe, kind of, and say, and who do I want to have closer, right? And make also a conscious effort to nourish those relations. Never did that before, but after my burnout, I started this practice, which I still have, and because I think there's so much also in terms of energy, as you said, getting from people, and or there's those I also experience for I perceive certain people as energy vampires for myself, right? And then
That's
it's like,
true.
how do you keep the vampires in their castles?
Absolutely, 100%. That's another trick, avoid the vampires, don't give
And
them
but
access.
how do you do that? How do you like now you're leading like a company like Siemens, and I think where you how do you do that?
Some vampires you can't avoid, so I say that, but I think I was pretty good at avoiding vampires, yeah, no, I was pretty good at avoiding vampires, and as well as avoiding kind of terrorist vampires, who are even more destructive. They don't just suck your energy out, but they destroy things. So no, no, but I think it's important to on a in regards to resilience. The question is also, how do you make sure that you regain energy. And one thing we didn't talk about energy. Energy is this thing that you have in the morning. You replenish it through sleep, and other practices. But then during the day, it burns off with the activities that you have, but also with those type of things. Who do you meet? Does it drain energy? Does it give you energy? What environment are you in? So and you overcome this very often through discipline. And people think, oh, this is cool. I can exert discipline, but discipline also burns through during the day. So that's why, I mean, one of the terrible things that ha- happened to me again and again. I'm getting better, but I by no means perfect on this. I have a day. The day is challenging. I have the discipline, and the night has come. And I'm finally at home or at a nice place. And I think, okay, this has been a great day, and my guards go down, and I open the fridge and I see a pint of ice cream, and I say, I can really reward myself with a spoon of ice cream. And about 2 minutes later, strangely enough, the ice cream cup is empty. I don't know who did it. And I look at it and I say, did it me? Oh my God. And this will now sit there forever.
No, but I think everybody makes this experience of like this is like if you this is the same thing why I can only do everything for myself from sports and everything in the morning, right? That's also why intermediate fasting works actually pretty well because in the beginning of the day you could still do it quite without problems, right? But later on
But the trick
it does.
is, I mean, the trick is that you should remove these type of things that require discipline from your environment. So, for instance, if I had not bought this ice cream myself, and put it in there, knowing it's my favorite ice cream, if I would have opened it and there is no ice cream in it, I would have closed it you know? And if you have, I love dark chocolate, as you know. So if some people really want to be very nice, want to be very nice to me, and they, whenever we get together, they show, Klaus, we have a new, really, really cool, source of dark chocolate. Try it out. This is wonderful. But in reality, for me to avoid it, it burns my discipline down. So I know that people want to do me a favor, but if you want to reduce the amount of discipline that gets taken from you, create your environment that gives you less need for having discipline, and also less people who drain energy, or less situations. And also on the positive side, you have things like, I mean, you see in the back this Chinese painting. I love that, and this is one of the things. Every time I come into this room, it gives me energy. It really gives me energy. And there's a story around it, a personal story. So that will immediately come back to me, because that's on the side. That's a very nice poem that I cherish. But these are things you can surround your environment. Sometimes listen to a piece of music. I love music. Music gives me energy. A walk outside gives you energy. A talk to somebody who you haven't talked to for a long time gives me energy. This conversation gives me energy.
Yeah, I feel the same. Even though I'm a little bit reluctant of removing my ice cream and my nachos. So
Good. Look. I mean, once in a while, it's fine. As long as it's the whole thing. You know. I mean, my intention was one spoon, but then it takes over. Oh, good. Oh,
that is like, and it's too good. It's like I just like I actually it's less sustainable. I bought the smaller packages just to
the packages is good. Smaller spoons is good. All of the little tricks, exactly. The best is not to have it.
that's very true. It's like, but we have to stay human in that whole journey, right?
I agree, and that comes in when you talk about a good glass of red wine or a nice whiskey in the evening, where I now know, and I cannot deny that it is a neurotoxin. I understand that, exactly.
Yeah, you see it in your data.
You see it in your data, yeah.
So it's like, well, there's that human aspect of no. I
Yeah,
think this is
exactly,
like
exactly,
it's like I
exactly.
think there's too much of so there's a certain joy also in that aspect, and as long as your overall things, I feel like if the overall bigger picture is working well, I think there's but also like conscious eating is very like you see me, I can sometimes inhale food, a lot of food when I'm not. And so for but I think it's as I said, it's like if that happens occasionally, that's I think that's okay. And I think the more the aspect of is like if I then if I have that ice cream, do I really enjoy it then? Or do I feel bad about it? Right. And so I think if you have that thought, if you are already at the point of ice cream, just enjoy it, right? Because then if you feel bad afterwards, it's not like you're drawn to your body well.
No, no, you're right. I mean, and in this case, the way you would do it is you take it, you put a portion out, put the rest back, and then call it a day and enjoy it. But the thing that happens is all of your guards are down, all of your discipline, and it becomes almost habitual bad habits. Very bad habits take over then. But I think what I really wanted to say is, look for what eats up your discipline. Look for how you can get resilience, and how you can sustain as much energy and get new energy during the course of the day. And so, and because it's always recharging. And basically, where you are a high performance athlete, and you always toggle between performing, recharging. And sometimes you go into survival zone, which is not bad in the beginning, because it actually gives you a lot of adrenaline. It pushes your boundaries. It makes your comfort zone bigger, as long as you find a way back to recharge or to performance zone, and don't drop to burnout, right?
Yeah, that's very, very true. Even though there is this thin line, but I think you can step over it, but you have to realize that you stepped over it. Because if you just stay in the, or in if you in your book it's the matrix, if you stay too long in that zone, it will lead you to a place. Then you will have a long recovery, but hopefully you will recover. That's then your only wish, probably. I talk from experience here, and
Yeah, I know. Survival zone first gives you superpowers because the hormones, adrenaline gets pushed out. You know, usually you see it when your focus becomes narrow. You know, and we've all it's this flight or fight thing. You know, you want to outrun the tiger. You know, so you suddenly get the superpower and makes you do almost superhuman things, but it only stays there for a while. Because then it burns through, and the more it burns through, you really drop into burnout. So the moment you see this, it's fine. You're just growing, but you have to find a way to quickly go back into performance or renewal.
Mm. That this is very true, and I think this is also we need to do another episode when we talk about the outer game. But now this was so much
Do
focused
that.
on the inner game, which was
Do
beautiful.
that.